So one of the biggest events in Game of Thrones, and really the first domino to fall in the very long conflict between House Lannister and House Stark, was the tragic fall of Bran. After King Robert rode north, after the death of his hand Jon Arryn, to give the now vacant position to his best friend Ned, Bran, who was more squirrel than wolf, decided to climb a tower, even though his mother explicitly told him not to.
I want you to promise me no more climbing.
And he happened to catch the queen and her twin brother doing the Dance of the Dragons, which tends to be a big no-no when you're already married and not a Targaryen. You know, maybe sleeping with your siblings is a bad idea when it comes to politics, especially when one of them has sworn a vow of chastity. Now, to avoid this getting out and getting back to King Robert, Jaime pushes Bran from the tower and he falls. Unlucky for them, though, he doesn't die, and this single act causes a myriad of events and fallout. Bran losing the use of his legs, there are assassination attempts, political schemes, imprisonments, and conflicts that all come about because a boy fell from a tower. But what if he didn't? What if, in episode 1 of GOT, Bran actually listened to his mom Catelyn and never climbed that tower and never caught Cersei and Jaime in the act? How would history change? Before we get into that though, if you guys like what I have to say today, feel free to drop a like and consider subscribing for more videos. Winter is coming, and now, let's get into it. So, as I said earlier, Bran getting pushed sets a lot of things in motion, and is arguably the foundation of the conflict between the Starks and the Lannisters. I say arguably because Catelyn's sister Lysa sent a letter to Winterfell warning the Starks about the Lannisters, and kinda hinting that they may have had something to do with the death of her husband, Jon Arryn. But regardless of that, in this timeline, Bran actually decides to listen to his mom when she tells him not to climb while the king is visiting Winterfell. So, what changes in the story as a result of this otherwise small change? Well, a lot, believe it or not. For starters, if Bran never climbs the tower, he never catches Cersei and Jaime in the act, so they can strengthen their sibling bond without worrying about flinging a 10-year-old from a window. If Bran is never thrown from the tower, then surprise, surprise, he never loses the usage of his legs. So instead of sitting around all the time, Bran can be a much more physically inclined and active character in the story. Bran not climbing that tower would honestly change his timeline in this story considerably, since he never saw anything. Cersei and Jaime's relationship stays a secret, like it did for the most of Season 1, but they don't live with the threat of Bran waking up from a coma, or suddenly remembering what happened and exposing them. Catelyn never figures out that Bran was pushed from the tower and begins to suspect the Lannisters of anything either. So the families would be on better terms for the most part, especially if Bran doesn't see anything or gets pushed out of that tower and ends up in a coma. The cat's paw assassin will probably never show up and try to kill him to hide what he knows forever, though I'm pretty sure that was also just another ploy by Littlefinger to put the Starks and Lannisters against each other, since Peter later tells Catelyn, who was investigating the attempted murder of her son, that the dagger meant to kill him belongs to Tyrion. But
what sort of imbecile arms an assassin with his own blade?
However, I am getting a bit ahead of myself. Before all the schemes that do and don't happen, let's talk about what does happen for Bran here. Since Bran was never in a coma and was never turned into a cripple in this timeline, it's likely that when Ned, Arya, and Sansa make their way to King's Landing, he's going to go with them. The reason I say this is because this is what was originally supposed to happen. Ned was going to go to King's Landing with his 2 daughters and second son until Bran got injured. Now that he's lacking that injury, Bran can make the journey with his family, and now 4 Starks head to the capital instead of 3. And this could add some interesting changes to the story if Bran tags along. For starters, this means that there will be more direwolves en route to the capital. Nymeria from Arya, Lady from Sansa, Summer from Bran. So the Starks have some more muscle this time around. But will they make it to the capital? If you remember in the canon timeline, when it was just Sansa and Arya, their wolves never made it to King's Landing for one very big reason: Joffrey. While on the road to King's Landing, Arya was play fighting with her friend, the butcher's boy, Micah, until Joffrey showed up, picked a fight with them, and when he threatened to kill Arya, Nymeria attacked him. And attacking a prince is a big no-no in this world. So Arya forces Nymeria to run away so she won't be killed for attacking the heir to the Iron Throne. But this isn't enough for Cersei, who demands that Sansa's direwolf lady be killed so she can still get her pound of flesh, further driving that rift between the families. But would the same thing still happen here? with the addition of Bran on the road to King's Landing, I could actually see a different outcome for the direwolves. Before his injury, and even after it, Bran aspired to be a warrior and knight. This is something that's gone into a lot of detail about in the books when it comes to Bran, as he laments the loss of his legs. Like his sister Arya, he dreams of fighting and being badass. So a change I could see in this timeline is instead of play fighting with Micah, Arya is instead play fighting with Bran by the river. It makes sense. For one, they're kids. Two, they're siblings, so fighting is nothing new, and they seem to already have a bit of a rivalry going on. So seeing these two whack at each other with sticks would make a lot of sense, and this could be a big change despite being relatively small. If Bran takes the place of Micah, this could change the entire interaction they have with Joffrey when he comes around. In canon, Joffrey is looking for a reason to be violent, using the justification that Micah was a commoner hitting a noble lady, Arya, and deciding to torture him, which resulted in retaliation from Arya and later Nymeria. With Bran around instead, Joffrey may not go after him the same way he went after Micah. I could definitely see him taunting and picking on Bran and Arya, and though I do think it would be on brand for him to start a fight for the heck of it, maybe saying that if Bran wants to be a knight, he needs a sparring partner, and uses that as an excuse to attack him. I think the situation could end differently than it did in canon. Maybe Joffrey is just fine picking on Bran instead of assaulting him like he did Micah, because Bran isn't a commoner, and therefore isn't as ripe for abuse. So maybe we plant the seeds of a potential rivalry between the two of them instead of an attempted murder. If that's the case, since Joffrey doesn't try to kill anyone, his arm is never bitten by Nymeria or any of the direwolves. She never has to run away, and Cersei isn't so upset that she orders ladies to be killed. So the girls get to keep their direwolves, with the addition of Summer from Bran. Granted, his wolf doesn't do any acting out and becomes the target of an angry Lannister. This could be pretty interesting in the long run if we draw off the books a little bit. The direwolves are magical creatures, and the Stark children in the books all have the capability to be wargs and greenseers, basically magical people through their connection with these animals. The Starks tend to have wolf dreams in the books. If the direwolves live, perhaps you could eventually see Arya and Sansa tapping into these warg abilities like Bran did in canon, since they don't have those strained or severed connections with their direwolves. Aside from that, I think the general plot of Season 1 goes the same, with some exceptions here or there. When it comes to Ned, even without the attempted murder of his son, he'll still get wrapped up in trying to find out what happened to Jon Arryn and discover Robert's bastards. But some of his initial conflict with the Lannisters will end up changing as a result of Bran being around this time, like what happens with his wife Cat and Tyrion. Since Bran was never pushed and never almost assassinated, it's unlikely that Cat ever tries investigating the Lannisters. She never makes that trip to King's Landing and meets Peter, and as I mentioned earlier, since Bran was never almost assassinated, he can't pin the cat's paw dagger on Tyrion. If that's the case, then there is never an instance where Catelyn encounters Tyrion on the road and sees fit to imprison him for the attempted murder of her son. They will never go to the Vale for him to stand trial, and this would most likely remove Bronn from the story, since the Vale is where he met Tyrion, standing as his champion in a trial by combat. So, no attempted murder, Tyrion is never imprisoned, there is never a trial by combat, and Bronn never appears. Oh, and Ser Vardis gets to live too, since he never has to fight Bronn. This also means that Tyrion doesn't get in with the mountain clans either, like he did in canon, since he never would have gone to the Vale. Another side effect of Tyrion not being captured is Ned. If Tyrion is never captured or taken prisoner by Catelyn, then Jaime will never attack him on the streets of King's Landing to get his brother back. And if they don't fight, Ned probably doesn't get a spear through the leg, so he'll remain able-bodied, and Jory won't get killed by Jaime. Tywin also wouldn't go on a rampage in the Riverlands either. Remember, in canon, Tywin started assaulting the Riverlands as revenge for Tyrion being taken captive.
If another house can seize one of our own and hold him captive with impunity, we are no longer a house to be feared.
Since his son is safe, this violence is now unnecessary, and because of that, Jaime will never have to leave King's Landing in this timeline. After fighting Ned, he left to join Tywin in his raids, but since Tyrion is safe, There are no raids, and no real reason for Jaime to leave the capital at all. And another thing that may sound surprising that probably wouldn't happen in this timeline as a result of this is that there's probably no Brotherhood without banners. If you remember, this is the group that Beric Dondarrion and Thoros of Myr were a part of. The Brotherhood was pretty much formed because of Tywin's terror campaign in the Riverlands. When Ned found out this was going on, he sent Beric Dondarrion and some other guys to sort out the issue and bring in the Mountain. And from there, they pretty much broke off and became their own group, with Tyrion never being captured and Tywin not retaliating. This may not need to come to pass, as the Brotherhood isn't even needed. Now, something else to think about in this scenario is the falling out of Ned and Robert. Around the time that Ned was attacked in canon, he quit being Hand of the King, and was preparing to leave when he got attacked, and was forced to stay due to his injury. Then Robert gave him back his old position as Hand of the King. But this may be a bit different now. With Ned not crippled, his men alive, and seemingly way more put together, he may actually end up leaving King's Landing since nothing is holding him back, like an injury. However, I do imagine that Ned will probably end up having one more talk with Robert before he ends up leaving, with Robert making him stay as Hand of the King like he did in canon, basically just giving him the order and refusing to let him leave.
With your leave, I will return to Winterfell and set matters straight.
Piss on that. Send a raven. I want you to stay. I'm the king. I get what I want.
And I think that ultimately, like the canon timeline, Ned will accept this from Robert because there's really no reason for him not to. The only real issue that they have with each other is the death of Daenerys. Ned doesn't want her to die, and Robert does. Other than that, he has no real beef with the Lannisters that would push him away from the capital at this point, since a lot of those events that caused that beef no longer exist. So I could see Ned taking up Robert's order and staying as Hand of the King. Now, it was around this time in canon when Ned got injured and made into Hand of the King again that Robert went on his hunt and got injured, later dying. I actually think that in this timeline, the death of Robert might be delayed. Here's why. Robert's death was really Cersei's plan, and honestly it wasn't that smart of one. It was just getting him drunk and hoping for the best. But part of the reason she was so quick to kill Robert is probably because of how bad things were getting for the Lannisters. The Starks and the Lannisters were at each other's throats for the most part, imprisoning and fighting each other all the time. People started to find out about her kid's true parentage. The walls were closing in, and she believed that the quicker that Joffrey was king, the safer that they would be. But in this timeline, the relations between the families would be better. Bran was never pushed. The Lannisters were never blamed for the assassination attempt. Tyrion was never imprisoned. The Riverlands were never attacked. Joffrey was never injured, and Lady was never killed. A lot of these things that put them against each other just don't exist, and neither is the stress that came with them. So maybe Cersei won't be in much of a hurry to kill Robert, since not too many people suspect anything going on, or is daring to say anything about her kids outside of Ned, who might actually not know anything for the time being. Now, Ned is already investigating the death of Jon Arryn and is finding Robert's bastards. He suspects something is up, but he only found out that Cersei's children are bastards because of Sansa. When he prepares them to leave King's Landing, she throws a little tantrum and says,
I don't want someone brave and gentle and strong, I want him. He'll be the greatest king that ever was, a golden lion, and I'll give him sons with beautiful blonde hair.
The lion's not a sigil, idiot.
His children's simplistic view on the world clue him into the fact that the royal children are illegitimate. But this only happens when he tries to make them leave King's Landing. And that only happens because of how tense things are with the Lannisters at court. But a lot of the events that were attributed to that no longer exist. So Ned doesn't try to force his kids to leave. As a result, Sansa never accidentally drops the hint, and so Ned doesn't have his epiphany and find out the truth in the book. At least, not yet. He may still find out, just not as soon as he did in the canon timeline. So he won't confront Cersei in this timeline, who may not be planning to kill Robert. The matter isn't exactly a pressing concern at the moment anymore. If Robert's death is delayed, then so is the War of Five Kings, since Renly and Stannis won't make a play for the throne while Robert is still alive. Ned, for the time being, won't be imprisoned and inspire retaliation from the north, and if Joffrey isn't king, he won't be killed. Robb won't take control of Sword of Winterfell and later king in the north. The Greyjoys probably won't rebel if war doesn't break out, so Theon may stay around for the time being and probably won't encounter Ramsay, at least for now. So things are somewhat good, but there are still other issues. Daenerys Targaryen is still around in Essos, and with Robert alive, she will definitely still be hunted. And since Robert isn't his son Joffrey, Barristan Selmy won't be dismissed from the Kingsguard, and probably doesn't go across the sea to serve her. Aside from that, I think one of the most important changes here that I haven't talked about yet is Bran. In canon, the loss of his legs closed a lot of doors for him in his life, but opened up some others, like the door to becoming the Three-Eyed Raven. But does that still happen in this timeline? If Bran never fell, never lost his legs, and made that journey with his father to King's Landing, his path in life would be very different. Instead of training to use his powers as a warg and greenseer, honing his mind, Bran would make use of his body and train to become a knight like he always wanted. Maybe he'd train with Arya and Syrio Forel. That would be interesting to see. But what's more likely is that Bran becomes a squire for an actual knight, since Syrio was really meant for Arya, since she's a girl and squiring and knighthood really isn't a thing for them. So Bran could probably be a squire for one of the Kingsguard knights, maybe Barristan Selmy, since he is regarded as one of the greatest knights in the kingdoms. Both Ned and Robert have a very huge respect for him. Or maybe Bran squires for Jaime Lannister. He is regarded as one of the best and greatest knights of his time, and is really talented. He is the Queen's brother, and honestly I think that match would be kinda hilarious. The guy that tried to kill him in canon is the one who trains him now. But in reality, Ned would not allow this, because he hates Jaime's guts for committing regicide and breaking his oath. So Barristan the Bold would be the more likely option to train Bran. And Bran training could honestly be a much bigger change than people know. For starters, since Bran never fell and went to King's Landing, Osha probably never gets introduced to the story. Remember, in Season 1, when Bran was crippled, he had to stay behind in Winterfell. He went out with Robb and Theon and got attacked by wildlings because he went off alone, and they wanted to rob him. Osha was one of these wildlings who tried to rob Bran. But Bran isn't in the north anymore. He can't go into the woods and get robbed, so Osha and her friends probably pass through the area unnoticed, at least if they don't run into Robb and Theon. Another thing to think about is that with Bran training to be a knight in King's Landing, he may never become the Three-Eyed Raven. He still has his legs, his life is different, his priorities are different. He isn't in the north and may not go back there for a while, especially if the death of Robert is delayed and the kids have no reason to try to escape yet. While he may still be a warg and have weird dreams, I don't think Bloodraven would reach out to him as heavily in this timeline, and this is big. Bran will probably never go on that journey through the north and won't meet Meera and Jojen Reed. He won't meet Bloodraven. And this is very important because if Bran never makes his way north to Bloodraven, another character that could be affected by this change is Hodor. Remember, in Season 6, it was revealed that Hodor is only Hodor because of Bran. With the War of Five Kings delayed, Winterfell is not taken, and since Bran isn't even in the north, he can't be displaced. He can't and doesn't need to roam the wilderness with Hodor and Osha, who never would have made her way to Winterfell to begin with. They don't meet Meera, Jojen, and Bloodraven eventually. He doesn't find out about the Night King and gets hunted by him, and Hodor won't have to defend him and get killed in the process. This is important because with his powers, Bran had the ability to access the past. When he was attacked by the White Walkers, he went into the past and saw a young Hodor, whose real name is Willis. Somehow, the past and present overlapped, and Willis saw Bran and heard Meera say,
Hold the door!
Which is where the word Hodor comes from. If Bran never goes on that journey and never has that encounter with the past, and Hodor isn't around, Hodor may just stay Willis and be normal since he won't be affected by Bran. With that being said, something I could see happening with Bran's timeline being changed so much is that Bloodraven may go after Jon instead. Jon would have been in the closest proximity to Bloodraven, as he would have still gone to the Wall in this timeline. And I could see Bloodraven viewing Jon as the best candidate with Bran so far away. It makes sense since Jon is actually related to him. Bloodraven, also known as Brynden Rivers, is a Targaryen bastard, so he's related to Jon Snow, who is secretly the son of Rhaegar Targaryen. So maybe he's the one who gets all the weird dreams and visions instead of Bran and is pulled deeper into the north. Maybe this is how Jon learns who he really is in this timeline. There are a lot of interesting possibilities here, and the conflict between our two main families is delayed for the time being. But anything could happen at any time. Maybe Robert will still die, Ned may find out the truth eventually, and the War of Five Kings could still break out, but later than it did originally. For now though, I think I'll end the video here. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, tell me your thoughts down below, and I will see you all next time.